there's the mental stuff, like you've got to be resilient. And resilience is something that really stands out, especially obviously with COVID. Now, in the post-COVID environment, we're seeing some interesting things happen. Like there's lots of change. You've got a new president in the White House now doing different things. Nothing's going to be really simple and straightforward over the next 5 to 10 years, I reckon. And we sort of want to talk about, there's a lot of people I've been speaking to that have done a bit like myself, where they've gone, well, I've been in corporate for X amount of time. I'm dealing with these overseas masters that are, they really don't catch any slack. They micromanage it to a millimetre of your life. And then there's this, well, what do? You want to get out and do something different. And a lot of people want to do their own business, or get into their own business, or buy a business, or do a startup. All of these challenges, how do you build resilience around that? What are the skills? What are the attributes? And what are the strategies? Because you're the master of strategy, George. What are the strategies around that resilience? Because you're one of the most resilient people I've ever met. And John's probably the second most resilient person I've ever met.
With 30 years experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies and original equipment manufacturers. Please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
Well, I'll come back to your point. When COVID was thrust on us, the population, I'll talk Australia, but the world really, but the population of Australia had never encountered a depression or a world war or a famine or a pandemic, for example. And myself and my daughter, who's a doctor of psychology, were asked after COVID finished, we were asked to go and speak to groups of companies. And without going on and on, we did it, and we swapped notes every night. And one of the things she said, which you'll hit on really, Mark, is that the people that we interviewed had never had to flex their resilience muscles ever in their life. So all of a sudden, they were going through uncharted waters. And as a result, they were very anxious. Anxiety set in. I was asked to do a number of sessions with various companies, some on Zoom and some, in person. And of course, when you work out what makes you anxious, why do you suffer anxiety? Well, it's really losing control of your future, both short, medium and long term. Many younger people and older, but mainly younger, started to suffer this resilience factor where they didn't know how to cope. And unfortunately, we've read in the news, there's a huge mental health problem. And I'm told by various psychologists that there's a tail, if you like, a scorpion's tail that hasn't even come out yet. And there's so much mental health that people suffered who are now starting to understand how they can't cope. In fact, I'm writing my 6th book right as we speak, called The Stealth Bomber, Attacking Men's Mental Health. Now, I'm focusing on men. Females are more adroit at networking and talking out loud, discussing, sharing issues. And I've learned this over my years. Men are physically powerful and women are mentally powerful. And that's why women handle breakups a lot better than men. They handle divorce a lot better than men. Men are loath to talk to one another often, but they're loath to talk because of fear of failure and being weak. Research says it stems back from the caveman era, where the caveman went out to catch the meat, and the wife, the female, stayed home looking after the kids and warding off the saber-tooth. So he was the provider. He was the breadwinner, and that's seeping down through grandpas and grandmas, but it's a conflict at the minute because he's going to find it pretty hard to get a job. Well, 2 reasons. One is that he's perceived to be out of date, whether he is or isn't, it doesn't matter, because the people employing him, by and large, will be a lot younger, 20 to 30 years younger, if not 40 years younger, and they'll think that he is, because they don't know, if you can say it like that he's got wisdom and experience beyond. He will threaten them because he knows more than them. Therefore, they don't want to employ them, right? But that's what I pick up. So the second thing is they don't think they'll be technology savvy enough in the current world. Many people that age don't want a new iPhone. They don't want a new piece of equipment. They don't even want a new smart TV because they know how the current one works. It's all to do with feeling inadequate. And so once you feel inadequate, you start to feel anxious and you suffer anxiety because you don't know how to use your mobile phone properly. Coming back to resilience, it's a bit like having another birthday mark. Everybody hates having the next birthday when they get over 21. Funny, isn't it? When you're under 21, you can't wait to have it. But when you're over 21, the last thing you want is another one until you think of the alternative. And when you think of the alternative, you can't wait to have your next birthday. So it's a bit like that with getting a job. You've now got to learn to pivot, pirouette. I like that better. Pivot, be flexible, be resilient. There's a great piece of information. Edward de Bono did research, and you all know, or most people know who Edward de Bono is or was, invented the words lateral thinking. Now, he did research on worldwide, the average percentage of the time a car goes in reverse in its lifetime out of 100% is 0.9, nearly 1%. So in other words, it goes forward 99% round figures and goes in reverse 1, but you can't drive without the 1. Therefore, people today, leaders today, have to be able to go into reverse to get out of a problem. I'm actually coaching and mentoring a DP at the moment. He's now a group DP handling 5 dealerships with general managers in the others, in each of them, because they're finding, and coming to what your initial comments were, is that the car industry especially, and as you say quite rightly, Mark, it's a microcosm of industry. Well, the car industry is rife with the Peter Principle. Now, if you don't know what the Peter Principle is, I'll explain it. It's by a book by Lawrence J. Peter, a US consultant, where people and employers are promoted based on their current performance to a new higher level of performance, which they've never been tested at before. And so when you promote somebody, they're very unlikely to say, no, I don't want it. So they say yes. And the business loses twice. They lose, for instance, the best sales generator, the best technician, or the best service advisor, and they get a person who hasn't or doesn't know how to manage people. So they lose twice. I mean, I found this in BMW in Sydney, where all the service advisors were all promoted from technicians. Well, one day I noticed that all the phones are off the hook. They said they're so busy they can't cope. So they take the phones off the hook so the customers can't ring. But the root cause of it was they're technicians, left-brain, task-orientated people who like IT and maintenance people and accountants and auditors and engineers. They're all left-brain, task-orientated, not right-brain, people-orientated, with lacking in emotional intelligence, communication, people skills. So thereby hangs a tale, you see. Now, this is what's going on. So some good examples. Let's stay with the motor industry for a minute. The motor industry perennially are promoting their best salesman to sales manager and losing twice. They still want to sell cars. They don't want to manage and be a captain coach of a team. They love the chase of the sale. And so they don't train, coach, motivate, mentor their sales team enough. They keep wanting to go and sell cars. The service advisors who have been promoted from being a service advisor to service manager, and they aren't used to running a team of people either. They're used to handling a customer and a technician on one in each hand, right? Now, a few of my clients, when I explained this to them, they started to employ people who weren't techs as service advisors. Well, and a lot of them females who were better at handling customers. You've got to be resilient to be able to cope with change, and people hate the word change. I've learned a word that's much more easily digestible, which is called fine-tuning. So we fine-tune our TV, we fine-tune a Zoom, we fine-tune the focus of a camera. We don't throw it out and get a new one. And it's less daunting. It's much more acceptable. So if you say, let's fine-tune this discussion, let's fine-tune the process of how we check in the vehicles. Let's fine-tune how we have meetings, for instance. People aren't threatened. As soon as you say the word change, they hate it. They resist. And in fact, they get distressed. It's really quite interesting. And in fact, what happened when we had the pandemic, COVID-19, they get anxiety attacks. Yeah, and it can be pretty serious. They can't handle it. So the key to the new leader in any industry, and it's prevalent in the Western world now, is you have to have emotional intelligence skills. You can't. It's not a nice to have. It's mandatory. Okay. It's like learning to do up your shoes. And there's 5 basic areas of it. Self-awareness. How do you impact other people, and how do you affect them? Self-regulation. How well are your ability to control and disrupt your impulses? To shoot from the hip, to suspend judgment. She's an idiot. He's an idiot. Yeah, this is the new way to go. Motivation. Well, this is interesting. What motivates you beyond money? Money only motivates people to a level called adequate. Once a person has adequate money, they're not motivated anymore by it. What motivates them is a new car, a new chair, a new title, a new house. And hidden in that motivation area is a very, very big problem at the moment. And it's caused by the digital world. And it's organisational commitment. How well are you coping with time management? It's a big, big problem. In fact, they were saying that in the paper today I read, there's a huge percentage of parents only have between 30 and 60 minutes a week just to look after their kids or see their children. And the fourth one is the key, empathy. And that's being able to understand who you're talking to and who you're working with, walk in their shoes and feel how they feel. That's the key prerequisite at the minute, because of what we've been speaking about, because of COVID-19, to being a leader at the moment. That's the big one. You've got to be able to walk in other people's shoes. And the last one, number 5, is social skills. Now, the ability to build rapport and the ability to build networks without wanting business, if I can say that. But build social networks, build relationships. And of course, the key to the new leader at the moment is the ability to influence others, but not for his or her reasons, but for their reasons, for the workforce's reasons, for the brand's reasons. So I'll give you an insight into some of the key abilities, key attributes. They've got to have a high level of self-confidence. They've got to have a realistic view of themselves. They've got to have a self-deprecating sense of humour, not take themselves too seriously. They have to be trustworthiness and have integrity. They've got to be comfortable with ambiguity. When it's shades of grey, some people can't handle it. It's got to be black or white, or that's the left-brain task-orientated person. They've got to have a level of openness to change. In other words, they've got to be prepared to fine-tune and pivot, to use your word. They've got to have, in empathy, got to have an expertise in building and retaining talent. They've got to be able to develop relationships. They've got to have a high cross-cultural sensitivity. Now, that's a real big one at the moment in Australia. We're a multiculturalism country, and many of our leaders that are older have trouble with that cross-cultural sensitivity. They really do. And lastly, the service to clients and customers in that empathetic way, that the only reason you're in business is for a customer or a client. So the only reason you should get out of bed anywhere in the world at the moment, if you're in business, is for a client. There's no other reason. They pay you your money. They pay your staff. And lastly, in social skills, effectiveness in leading change. All this is emotional intelligence. You see, it's all attitudinal. The ability to persuade and influence other people to do things differently, and expertise in building and leading teams. Now, having gone through that, that's an amazing, list, if you like. What percentage of leaders do you think have got all that? 20% have got it. 20% have got it naturally. You can probably get up to 50% have it through coaching and mentoring, and knowledge is power. But a lot of people are scared of coaching and mentoring because they feel they will be made vulnerable and transparent, and therefore lose or be seen in the eyes of the coach or the mentor to be inadequate. So they don't do it. Therefore, they don't get emotional intelligence skills that they need to enable them to lead, not manage. Leadership is an action, not a position. So that's why the leaders of the world, and I'll use Trump at the moment, whether he's right or wrong, we're not going to debate that, but 73 million people want him, so it's none of my business. He is a man of action, you see, and whether you like what he's doing or you don't, he's taking action. That's why they elected him. So if he was elected and didn't take action, there would be a rebellion, because he would have conned them into electing him on the presumption he would take action when, in fact, he's not going to. So he is. See, leaders say, follow me. Leaders aren't followers. So leaders have to be courageous. They have to be, above all, if you think back to all the leaders in the world you admire, they were all great orators. I'm not saying they were right. They all had the ability to move people to change. And you can go through them. Churchill, JFK, Mahatma Gandhi, they've all got it. They've all got this ability to be an orator. Now, many leaders today aren't realising that ability. It's a bit of a change, even in the Western politics in Australia. We've got people who aren't good orators wanting to be Prime Minister. Dan Andrews, to his credit, whether he's right or he's wrong, was a great orator. He had daily press conferences and he wanted them. And that's what his key plank was, being an orator.
That's amazing. It just nails so many elements. And the one that really stands out for me is the Maslow. I'll recall in one of my, just years ago, one of the organisations I worked in, I had a team session with the whole sales team, brought them in, the operational guys plus also the field guys. And actually got Maslow was something that in my various studies through my associate diploma and also my degree, a marketing degree, Maslow kept coming up. And I kind of thought, why does this guy keep coming up in this Maslow story? When you live and breathe Maslow, you can just apply it everywhere. And you just talked about before that whole COVID scenario. And for those that aren't familiar with Maslow, you've got your physiological first, then you've got your security and safety, and then you've got your esteem, which is the esteem. And then you've got your, there's a social one, then there's the esteem, and then there's the self-actualization, which is the esteem and self-actualization are the two that everyone strives for. That's nirvana of happiness.
Well, they're the productive levels here.
But the key is, if all it takes, and I remember having this argument with an individual many years ago when I first studied Maslow, and because he was talking about, esteem is everything. And I said, esteem is nothing if you don't have safety and security. Because a person who is in Ukraine right now, while the bombs are whizzing in, is not safe. They're not worried about doing that car restoration that you mentioned.
Thank you for that.
or baking that amazing sourdough bread, which we did in COVID. And it's interesting how you can apply that Maslow hierarchy and just look at each person as to where they're at. Because if those foundations aren't met on the way up, you have got absolutely no chance at all in getting the best out of someone.
Yes. In fact, if you don't get satisfaction moving up, you'll drop back down to security or physiological.
Correct.
Which means you're angry. See, in a bit of depth, Maslow invented that hierarchy of needs in 1943, and it's still valid today. He's a genius.
Absolutely. It is genius. It is nothing but genius.
And it's taught around the world, as you rightly say, when you're doing your degree. My daughter said this to me, Dad, they don't teach it like you describe it, because I've put a business common spin on it so that people understand it. And they go, oh, yeah, we did, Maslow, but I never really worked out what it was about. Now, that becomes the focus. Two things at the moment become the focus of my coaching and mentoring. One is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the second one is Professor Goldman's emotional intelligence, because unless you understand, that's knowledge, isn't it? So unless you have the knowledge of those two, you can't go forward. You're spinning your wheels in quicksand.
Actually, George, you just made me think of another really profound statement, which I think fits perfectly what you're just talking about. I remember being at a seminar once, and this genius got up and spoke, and he said, tomato, vegetable or fruit? He just asked the room. And half the room said vegetable, half the room said fruit. And he said, well, knowledge is that the tomato is a fruit. And he said, wisdom is knowing not to put the tomato in the fruit salad. And it was like one of those moments. It was like,
classic,
oh, my God.
It
just makes sense. Of course it makes sense.
Yeah,
but
fantastic.
That's the wisdom that you're talking about. And that's interesting that you say that when you visited China, they recognised your knowledge.
Yeah.
But more so, it's not just the knowledge, because they've all got their degrees. They've all done Kumon and all that sort of stuff. But they know that with the knowledge that you have the wisdom, and that's respected. And that is, it's a fascinating thing that a lot of people get caught up with knowledge and don't really think of the wisdom side of things, because they're very proud that tomato is a fruit, because they're getting the other half of the room feel like dodos because they thought it was a vegetable.
Yeah, exactly.
I was actually in that side.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned about the going to China. I mean, I'll explain this. 9 associate professors came out to Australia, and I was asked to coach and mentor them. I couldn't speak Chinese. Only one of them could speak fluent English, and she would interpret everything that we went through. Now, when I was then going to China some 2 years later, I wrote to them all asking who could I meet up with for a coffee to say hello. And the only one that replied was the female interpreter, who happened to be the deputy dean at the University of Agriculture in Beijing. And she said, "Oh, would you mind giving a half-day seminar on the benefits of communication with leaders?" She said, "I'll interpret for you." So she came pick me up. They took me out there, and of course you have to back off how much information you're going to talk, because she's got to do what you say. So you have to cut it back. The professors at the university, the one thing they wanted to know is how to communicate effectively from the other person's position, not theirs. It's interesting that the key ingredient at the moment in the world is communication, and that's where the leaders, the best leaders are the best, and the worst leaders are the worst.
I think possibly a big problem we have is the MBA programs, and I'm an MBA myself, but in the 70s and 80s, they started coming out with, you need to measure everything and hold everybody accountable to targets. And then if you don't meet your targets, you're out. And that goes a lot against what you've been saying about the empathy and having sort of emotional intelligence and helping, because if someone doesn't get their targets, it's often not his fault. It could be manufacturing issues, it could be product issues, it could be pricing issues, all types of things. And I think even as some companies in the US were churning, saying you have to create competition between your staff and churn the bottom 20% every year. And I think
that sounds like you're reading Jack Welch. Go on.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't want to say his name, but it was Jack Welch's philosophy. And I think that causes the problems, because you fire these people and then the rest of the company are insecure because they keep thinking, well, when's my turn? And then they start looking for alternative employment.
See, that's managing by fear. I've got a couple of businesses that are doing that right now. Managing by fear. Wow, that's out of date, mate. You must have, you're still looking at black and white TV. Did you know we've been on the moon? And we've got electric vehicles. Wow. So managing by fears, and you're right when you said that. It used to be what was it called? It was called managing metrics, or?
Yeah, it was managing by metrics.
Well, that'll do anyway. It's not quite exactly what I was going to say. But we're talking about leadership, you see. In leadership, the difference between, my opinion, and I get this asked a lot, the difference between what you and I are just talking about now, managing is working in the business for targets. Leadership is working on the business to move people to greatness. And so the best leaders they aren't hands-on all the time. They don't worry. How about a pilot on an A380? He doesn't serve the coffee and the meals. Yeah, but he could. And the first officer manages. The first officer usually flies the plane. The left seat, the captain, doesn't fly the plane. He only lands it or takes it off at captain-only landings. Captain only. I think Hong Kong used to be a captain-only landing and take off. So the first officer is more the manager, and the cabin manager is a manager because it's in their names. But the chief executive, if you like, the CEO of the flight, is the captain in the left seat, who doesn't do any of that. He just supervises the whole lot and walks through the cabin, says, hello, how you going? And so leadership is working on the business. Management is working in. And of course, John's right. You can't just wander around having a social outing, can you? You got to hit targets, and you got to have metrics. Of course, that's a given though. But that's what I'm talking about tonight. Is leadership is different to that. Leadership is working on the business, helping a group go with you on a journey into the future in an emotional intelligence way. And one of the things you mentioned, Mark, in Maslow, in level 4 self-esteem, you see, you've got to respect yourself and receive respect from others in that order. But the behaviour pattern is to let people display their abilities, skills, knowledge and experience. Well, that means delegation, you see. So it's right what John's saying. So you've got to be able to, what I call throw to grow. It's a bit of a rugby term. You've got to throw the ball. And those managers who don't throw the ball don't become leaders. They stay as managers.